Hello chums, and welcome to Setups for Simpletons. I've created an entire series dedicated to explaining Gran Turismo 7's quirky and sometimes unforgiving tuning system, but sometimes it's nice to just copy someone else's homework and be done with it. So in this series I will take one car at a time, show a complete setup, and a lap of the Nürburgring for good measure. Disclaimer, if you use my setup it does not mean you're a simpleton. Let's begin! The Nissan 350Z, or Fairlady Z33, depending on which part of the world shat you out. This is one of those cars where I pretty much forgot it existed, and that it had an engine swap. That's not to say I don't like the Z33, I very much do, but it does fly under the radar. Fitting the RB26 from the R34 GTR gives it the capability of almost 1,000 horsepower, and despite that this car isn't actually all that terrifying, hence it's here and not in an episode of Taming A Monster. For the visuals, I've got aftermarket wheels one size up from standard. Increasing the size can make the car slightly more agile, decreasing the size can make the car more forgiving over the curbs. The Nissan has a front splitter for front downforce, the ever important rear diffuser for extra front and rear downforce, and a custom rear wing. The Type A and B rear wings don't provide quite as much rear downforce. The livery is based on a wide-body car which I plagiarised from a Google search. I did cheat and use a pre-made template for the wheel arch flares. You can find the livery as usual by searching for Super Turismo. The setup was slightly more complicated than I expected it to be. I found the car mostly forgiving, but it took me some time to get the last touches dialed in. Most of the setup is very typical front-engine rear-wheel drive, without too much variation from what I would normally do, other than experimenting with compression, anti-roll bars and camber. The gears have been spaced in such a way that first gear is still useful for engine braking and getting the car rotated in low-speed corners, while sixth gear will get close to redline on the Nordschleifer's back straight. The Nissan Skylady has handling characteristics that are the complete opposite to the Ferrari 812 from last time. The Ferrari had lift-off oversteer, and at mid to high speeds it would understeer when accelerating. This Nissan is the other way around, mostly feeling quite understeery when coasting through a corner, but if you accelerate it will kind of pull itself around. There's a bit of a fine line between this working or just kicking the tail out. This is an engine swap I can't help but feel a tad uninspired by. The car handles its power really well, so it's not like it's bad to drive, I just can't believe how quiet the RB26 sounds. If you compare the R34 to pretty much any other RB26 powered Skyline, the R34 sounds very muted and a bit flat, where the R33, the 400R, and the recently added Z-Tune sound like thunder. Still, I always nitpick when it comes to sound. After all, if you have an inline 6 revving to 10,000 RPM, you kind of want it to sound dramatic, right? As far as RB26 swaps go though, this is easily the best car for the engine. The R31 Skyline is too squirrely and the old 1969 Fairlady is way too squirrely, too old, too light and unstable to handle it. There is a small part of me that would like to see this car receive an LS9 swap to somewhat recreate the Donut Media high-low cars. I guess we already got something similar though with the Amuse 380 RS. In the end, I managed a 6 minutes 13, which isn't too bad unless you consider that the Ferrari 812 has similar power and beats it by about 20 seconds. On the other hand, it beats the LT4 TVR Tuscan, which is a pretty formidable thing itself. So, that was my setup for the RB26 swapped Nissan 350Z. I hope it helped. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and kick me in the bell so that you get notified of future uploads. Take care of yourself, and ta-ra!